In today's modern society, there are things that we as a collective society or civilization that we must worry about for the end of the world, such as nuclear war or a natural disaster such as a meteor. However, what if I told you that these things are nothing compared to the true threat that humanity faces? And this is something that we have faced many years before, and I could be talking about nothing other than the Australian emu located down south. But you're probably thinking to yourself, why would something like this happen? Or how did it happen in the first place? Well, let me give you a little bit of a history lesson between the relationship let me give you a lesson on the relationship between humans and emus going back to the 1930s. Earth in the 1930s was going through a pretty rough time because of the Great Depression, but one place that was most affected by this would have to be the country of Australia. However, this is because of their money issues because of the crash and the farmers having issues with 20,000 emus arriving onto the areas over by Western Australia where they would be attacking farms, causing the farmers to notify the government, which would then notify the military to come in and take away the emus. This led to a war zone covering most of Western Australia against the rest of Australia. This would last for about 2 months or so of nothing but constant gunfire and a couple thousand emus and humans dying. In about December of that year, it came to a conclusion, but not before destroying countless cities, towns, and villages, all due to the massive number of emus in the superpower that they had called the Army of Emus, something that the Australian military had never faced before in their entire, you could say, history.
Okay, now at this point, I'm sure most of you sitting at home are probably saying to yourself, "Are you fucking high?" But all I have to say to that is that I have provided all the information that I possibly could to you through the infinite source of knowledge that me and you alike would call the internet or the World Wide Web. Now, if you, again, are sitting at home and you are for some reason getting extremely triggered by this information that I'm trying to give to you guys, then you're better off going to watch something else. I don't know. I'm pretty sure like JoJo's Bizarre Adventures on something. You can go watch that. But if you're ascended genius like me, then I congratulate you, hipster sitting at home on his computer watching this video, and I encourage you to keep going with this video. Now here's where we get to the science of things. And if you at home are one of those people who likes to reject science, then I would recommend that you actually stay and watch this video, as I might be able to enlighten you, unlike the guys who got triggered enough to go watch JoJo. But yeah, so I recommend that you guys, as well as those who stayed, aka the loyal hipsters, continue watching this video, so maybe I'll be able to save you guys and give you guys that knowledge you'll need to survive when the emus eventually come back to destroy us. So here we go. Okay, now allow me, sitting here to acknowledge something to you guys. I am not some sort of genius or doctor or scientist or some astrophysicist or anything like that, but I will try my best to explain to you guys the true purpose of this video, showing that these emus are not just 4-foot-tall retarded birds, but are actually geniuses in the art of warfare and strategy. Now, I will come back to this later, but I would like to start off this next section with talking about I'm going to start where I left off on the emu war at the very end. Now, okay, as we all know from the lesson I gave a couple seconds ago, the emus won and the humans lost, and most that the humans had to do was that they ended up giving the emus all of Western Australia, which was originally farmland in Australia, and Australians respectively kept the rest of their land. Now, what I'm going to be talking about here is about how I believe the emus won and how I believe that they will conquer America and the rest of the world in the near future.
Okay, now, seeing as how this took place in the 30s, the Australian military would most likely be using some sort of, submachine gun or pistol, as were used in World War II or even World War I at this point, which you'd think would make the Australian military almost near invincible. However, this is where the genius and tactics of the emus comes into plan. I am here to tell you that these creatures that we think are just these retarded-looking, flightless birds actually have one of the most unique abilities of any animal ever seen on this planet, and that is this. It's that the very individual cells of blood in these emus is actually magnetic. That's right, magnetic. Alright, now, okay, so obviously the Earth is magnetic, and by definition, I'm sorry, by definition, magnetism is when two invisible forces push or pull on one another using magnetic material. Now, a magnetic material is like a metal, such as, I guess, iron or steel. So, I did some research on the anatomy of specific bullets from this time era, and I came to the conclusion that these bullets that were used were composed of lead. Now, most of you people who are quote-unquote geniuses at home are probably saying to yourselves, wait, like lead isn't magnetic, I must be crazy. However, I did some quick research and found that it is true that they do not have magnetic polarity, but they can be affected slightly by magnetic fields. Now this is important later on. So, the bullets, obviously, if you've taken any sort of general physics class, you learn that if a bullet is fired, it will go constantly at a constant rate before gravity and velocity begins to pull it until it hits the ground and sits in a resting state. Now, since the blood of these creatures is magnetic, any of the emus that were killed in the first few battles of Australia would have their blood cover all of Western Australia. This ultimately would affect the magnetic polarity of the planet in that specific region. And from what we've seen, by using magnetic fields as shown earlier, the blood of these emus would affect the magnetic polarity, causing any of these bullets that were fired by the Australian military during the war in the 1930s to ultimately just fall to the ground and pretty much just be useless at that point. And this would go on for 2 months until thousands of these Australians would lose their lives. And that would ultimately conclude the emu war. But you guys are probably saying to yourselves, how could something like this happen today? What are you getting on about this being a threat to modern society? Well, I have only one thing to say to you, Mr. Triggered 12-year-old who's probably sitting in his bed caressing a waifu coffee mug. I'm just gonna say that these emus have a plan for this too. And it starts like this. Flash forward about a couple years later, and the war has ended. All the bullets that have been used, composed of lead, are still on the ground laid across Western Australia. These emus would take their genius-like mental capacity, obviously, and use the lead and break it down and construct lead suits that are somewhat of an armor to not only protect them from like bullets because of the strongness of the metals, but also it would render nuclear war also completely useless, as the radiation would not harm them because of the lead suits, and it would ultimately just make parts of the world uninhabitable. Now, I've been your host, Tom Knight, and remember, the threat of the world is not nuclear annihilation, but the war-crazed emus that pollute the earth. I've been your host, have a good one.